Okay, so let's go on to question 44b. Okay, so question 44b asks, discuss whether oil exporting countries should use fiscal stimulus or measures which directly target the various sources of the above mentioned deflation. Okay, so this is a 15 mark. So 15 mark is 10 plus 5. 5 is for evaluation. So just make sure that you can talk about maybe the limitations. And then also make sure you give a conclusion at the end about what you think. Yeah? Okay, so let's get on to the requirement. So requirement 1 would be that discuss whether oil exporting countries should use fiscal stimulus. So fiscal stimulus will be our requirement 1. Yeah. So oil exporting countries should use fiscal stimulus to tackle the deflation. Okay. Then requirement 2 would be that you should use. You just explain a measure. That directly targets the various sources. So there's two sources of deflation here, right? So one is that there is falling oil prices, which cause government export revenue to decrease. And then there's also an oversupply of property leading to falling rental. So you can go for either A, the oil prices, or B. Yeah. Explain the measure that directly targets the various sources of deflation. Okay, so those are two requirements. So for requirement 2, you can do either A or B. Yeah, both are fine. So let's start with requirement 1 first. Okay, so fiscal stimulus. Okay, maybe this is. Let me put a note that says requirement 1. So for requirement 1, you can say that fiscal stimulus can help. It should be used. Used to target the deflation. Okay, so what is fiscal stimulus? We have fiscal stimulus. There's two portions. So fiscal means the stuff that the government can do. So the government can either change taxation or they can change government expenditure. So the first thing the government can do is to reduce personal income tax. So if they reduce personal income tax, then it increases disposable income. YD stands for disposable income. Then it increases purchasing power, and then it increases consumption. Yeah. The other tax the government can reduce is to reduce corporate taxes. So corporate taxes. So if you reduce corporate taxes, then the firms will have more profits after the tax, right? So let's say I make $100 and your corporate tax was $20, then I'm only left with $80. But then if my corporate tax is only $10, then I'm left with 90, right? So if you reduce corporate taxes, it increases your after tax profits. Yeah. And so this incentivizes firms to invest more. So then this will increase investment. Yeah. The government can also spend directly. For example, on capital projects. Then this would directly increase G. Yeah. So collectively, because C, I, and G are components of AD. AD would increase from AD0 to AD1. And this will start the multiplier process. Okay, so just to recap a little bit, so I mentioned to you that when you want to explain the macro problem, right, you want to do it in steps first. So here, right, in this case, you want to start with the policy, right, and then how the policy influences the various components, which is what we are doing here. And then you see in between here, we use a lot of technical terms. Yeah, technical terms like disposable income, purchasing power, after-tax profits, and so on. So when you want to explain how the policy influences the components, C, I, G, X minus M, then you got to make sure you use components. Yeah. So after you go to components, then you want to link to AD, right? And because this is an essay question, you make sure you draw a diagram. Draw a diagram, and then after you draw a diagram, you make sure you explain the process. Okay. So our process here is that we want to solve deflation, but we will solve deflation through also the multiplier process. Okay, so there are two things. One is we're going to talk about the multiplier process, okay, because there will be cycles of spending and respending. And then in addition, we're going to also bring in how there will be more competition for scarce resources. Competition for scarce resources. Scarce resources. And then as a result, there will be bidding for factors of production, and then so forth, and how it increases GPL. Later I'll flesh this out a little bit more. Yeah, so but basically you want to talk about the K process as well as the inflationary process. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, so we're going to start with the K process first. So I finished talking about the policy. Sorry, let me use different color. So let's finish talking about policy. I used the technical terms, I linked to the components, I drew my ADS diagrams, so now I'm here. Okay, so let's talk about process. So the K process, so the increase in AD will lead to drawdown of inventories, or firm inventories. So inventory levels fall below what they usually are, and then this acts as a signal for firms to increase production. So they hire more FOPs from households, more FOPs from households. And if they hire more FOPs for households, then households will have an increase in factor income. And since they feel richer, they will consume more, so that will lead to a rise in induced consumption. Okay, so the rise in induced consumption, it creates income for other households, right? Creates income for other households who also increase their induced consumption. So you can see here, so I spend more, increases the income of my friend spends more, he increases the income of his friend, and so then there will be creating cycles of spending and respending. Spending and respending. Okay, so this is the first part. So this is the multiplier process. So we're done with this. So then we gotta tell the examiner, because here the problem here is that there is deflation, right? So you need to make sure that you target the deflation. So but then as AD slowly approaches the full employment level, there will be a lack of spare capacity. There's a lack of spare capacity. So what this means is that you want to hire FOPs, but then your country is running out of FOPs, right? So there's no spare capacity. And so what happens is that firms will start to bid. Firms will bid for these scarce factors of production, which will increase the price of the factors of production. And if you're spending more on rent, you're spending more on the worker, then you have an increase in COP. And then firms will pass on the increase in COP to households. Then you have an increase in GPL from let's let's see, P1 to P2. Okay, so what's happening here? So two things are happening. So maybe we can start by saying that, so for the diagram wise, we can say that, initially maybe we were here, right? So through the multiplier process, you will get somewhere here. Yeah. But then AD continues to increase. And so maybe now you are here. Y2, now you have P2. Also, that should be P0. Let's change P0 to P2. Okay. Yeah, so that's what's basically happening. Okay, then when that happens, then this helps to combat the reverse the deflation. To reverse, I think combat is also fine. So combat the deflation by increasing prices from P0 to P2. Okay, so this is your first step you want to do is you want to explain how the fiscal stimulus can help to solve the deflation. Okay, then so I mentioned to you here that there are evaluation marks, so you want to give some limitations for why fiscal policy might not work. Yeah, explain why fiscal policy might not work. Okay, so the extract did mention that there is falling export revenue. So it's a bit complex the way it works, right? Because in Saudi Arabia, the government is the one that owns the oil companies. So when there are falling export revenues, then consequently there also will be worsening budgets. Yeah. So government's export revenue will cause a reduction in public spending. So what you can see here is that they're already facing a budget. They might be already facing a budget deficit in the case where T minus G is less than 0, right? So what this means is that the government might two things might happen, right? One is that there's a constraint, right? So you if your program is already on a budget deficit, your government may not have the funds to go and engage in such aggressive fiscal spending. So that's one. And the other one is that something called a crowding out effect will happen. So if the government doesn't have money, then the government needs to borrow to finance the spending. Yeah. Okay, so two things will happen. So you can write two points like this. Let me just write the point here. So for EV, you can write two things, right? You can say that there is decrease in government revenues due to the falling oil prices. There's already a decrease in government revenues due to falling oil prices. So the government may already be facing a budget deficit. So a budget deficit occurs when maybe T minus G is less than 0. Yeah, and so two things can happen as a result. One, that this acts as a constraint, because with the budget deficit, the government may not be able to finance the fiscal finance the fiscal spending. So that's the first thing. All right, and the second thing that happens is that there might be difficulties because there's crowding out, right? So the government has to borrow from the loanable funds market. Yeah, so the government has to go and borrow from their own domestic banks, right? Loanable funds market. So what you realize is that if the demand for loanable funds goes up, then the price of loanable funds will go up, right? Because everybody wants to borrow the money, right? So you have like a stack of money here, and this guy wants it, and this and this guy wants it, and then suddenly you have the government also wants it, right? And so everybody will start fighting for this bag of money, and the way they fight for the bag of money is that it will lead to a rise in interest rates, right? So this guy will say, why don't can I lend the money to me? I'll pay you 3%. And then this guy will say, you know what, I'll pay you 4%. But the government comes in and the government says, hey, you know what, I'll pay 5% for this. So when there's a rise in the demand for loanable funds, right? So there's a rise in demand for loanable funds, then interest rates will go up, right? And we all know what happens when interest rate go up. When interest rate goes up, C and I will both decrease, right? So C decreases because the cost of borrowing goes up, so people don't want to borrow as much. I likewise, because rational investors, they only invest if the rate of return is higher than the interest rate. So if interest rate goes up, both of these go down, right? And there's a term for this, so C and I gets crowded out. C and I get crowded out because they decrease. So that's why it's called the crowding out effect. And what's the consequence? That even though there's an increase in G, C and I are decreased, may offset it. So the increase in AD is less significant. So that can be another point of evaluation. Yeah. Okay. So this is requirement number 1.